Section 20. Allocation, assignment, scheduling, and flying. So rest while on short call. This is a new provision or improved provision. Once you've been on short call for 9 hours, the call out time is going to be increased to 12 hours. This is to prevent what we call the AM PM swapping. So we'll do a real quick example. If you start short call at 6 a.m. and they call you at 4 p.m., that call at 4 p.m. is going to release you to something 12 hours or more from now. Pretty self-explanatory. Short call given intervening rest period due to UPA duty period limits, minimum rest period is 12 hours. Monthly bidding window moved. This is an improvement. Monthly bidding window opens 1700 on the 4th under this agreement. PBS opening absence and activity changes will be held until after PBS unless pilot and company concur. So you shouldn't see those big fluctuations on the LPA or G line where you got to go back in and amend your bids at the last minute. So that's set no later than 1700 on the 5th. Captain awards released by the 13th at midnight. First officer awards out by the 15th at midnight. And technology and process improvements result in first officer solve times less than 82 hours without decreased quality. I try not and read the things out loud that you can read yourselves. With this, we'll get into a little bit further, but this is going to slide everything up in the bid period. So you get your schedule earlier. Dispute resolution window is you'll still get the normal window there period to adjust that. And then your trip trading window is going to open earlier as well. Availability for unknown PBS awarding. So today, I'm going to give you the today first. Today, the company can construct a reserve line for the days you're available prorated if necessary for the pilot. So going forward, if you would have been a line holder and you have mutual concurrence, the company can give you a blank schedule if you wish. If you think that's a better deal than sitting reserve or some other undesirable, if you want to construct your schedule yourself, you may do that. A good example of that, just for if you're looking for an example, if somebody asks, what does that mean? If somebody's taking time off, like for paternity leave or something like that, and they say, hey, I'm ready to come back early, that's a good example of that where you can say, I can ease back into it. And next week, if I don't want to work, or next week I am able to work, now I can go in there and pick the trips I want to have overtime and participate in trip trade versus going back in and going right back on reserve. Okay, number of OE blocker days. This really kind of reared its ugly head during the pandemic. Training scheduling fell behind on OE, and this caused pilots to languish in OE blocker hell, basically. The downside of that, while you are getting paid, is you don't own your schedule. So you may have 18 OE blocker days and you bid for the rest of your schedule to have certain days off. They didn't do the right thing by getting a line check pilot assigned to you to complete IOE. And now you're out there and the phone rings and they're sending you on IOE over days that you've had bid off for weeks. So this is a correction of that. It brings the OE blocker days. It makes the length both accountable via the system scheduling committee, and it's tied to what the recent average days are. So today, OE backlog is decreased quite a bit. So now we're going to go back to a normal OE blocker schedule plus 20%. And if the pilot requires more than 15 hours of OE, it's going to be a minimum of 10 hours blocked. Okay, dispute resolution for recurrent training awards. This is new. This is going to establish a dispute resolution committee that's 2 ALPA from the SSC and 2 from the company, much like we have for dispute resolution committee for PBS. So if you believe that you were awarded a training schedule for recurrent training schedule that is improper, now you'll have recourse for that. You're not going to be able to go and now get the training schedule off of somebody else's schedule and ruin their day, but you will be able to be repaired in a proper manner there. Similar to PBS. With PBS, you're not able to say, I should have had that guy's line, and they call that pilot up and say, bad news, we're taking all your trips. That's not how it works. They have a very successful process that definitely benefits the pilots. Okay, reserves who are changing bases. We talked about this earlier in section 5 when pilots change bases. This is specific to reserves, how they're handled. So a reserve that has a block of days that cross between the 2 bid periods. So end of right where we're at today, end of August, going into September, they have their choice where they complete that reserve block. So if you want to start let's say pilots going from San Fran to Denver, they can elect to stay in San Fran for that entire block, and they will be entitled to company paid hotels starting on the night before the next bid period. This is kind of speaking to crash pads, so that you don't have to incur another month in the crash pad or $500 a night hotel rooms in San Fran. If you elect to stay put there, you can continue out that reserve block there, and they'll cover the hotels. And if you elect to advance to the other base early, if you want to start at the end of August and go ahead and go to Denver because that's your desired location, you can do that as well. You're not entitled to hotels in Denver because that's a voluntary decision to advance, and that's how that's handled. There's a quick example on there as well. It says the same thing. Okay, SSC involvement and fatigue modeling software. So all of our trips that we fly today is part of the pairing review process early on. So kind of how pairing is born. Trip flights are put into the optimizer. The optimizer is a giant smart computer system that builds pairings that come, or trips that are constrained by either FAR 117 or contractual rules. The company can set buffers there so that we're not doing 20-minute turns like 1970 Southwest. If they want to do that, they can do those things. But also one of the parameters that has to be met is the system scheduling committee reviews those pairings to make sure that they're complete, to make sure that they're legal and UPA compliant. But also one other layer is they run those trips through a fatigue modeling software, software program called Safety Fast, pretty much the industry standard that we use. What we're going for here is that they have to continue to use that if they're going to make any meaningful changes into how that software reviews those trips. That can only be done in consultation with the SSC. And again, consultation doesn't mean they say, hey, we're changing it to say that fatiguing trip last month is no longer fatiguing. That's not what that means. They have to meet and come to a consensus on that. The other piece of that software is they can't just ditch that software program and go with some in-house program that they developed or some other program without an agreement with the SSC. It does have an escalation clause there. Fatigue Management Steering Committee will be tasked with coming up with a mutually agreeable solution. That's the VP of Flight Ops, Senior VP of Safety, Central Air Safety Chairman on our side, and SSC Chairman on our side. So 2 and 2 there that they have to come to an agreement. Bid packets provided to the SSC. This is an internal process that most of the pilots won't be aware of, but the bid packets have to be dropped off to the SSC no later than 5 days prior to PBS opening. That's to allow those local pairing reviewers. So every base has a local pairing reviewer for each category. Some have multiple for the larger bases, but there is a Cleveland 737 pilot that reviews every Cleveland pairing each month to make sure that these things are done correctly. And what this speaks to is if the company delays it because network wants to optimize the schedule or something like that, that if they delay it and put us into a crunch, that the company will reimburse the payment for having those volunteers pulled off of trips. We're not going to have our pilots flying trips and then having to get into a hotel and then work through the night to review something. If the company is going to put the crunch on it, then they're going to take care of covering those pilots the ability to do that. So our pilots, our line pilots, 16,000 people, shouldn't be their schedule's detrimented because somebody drug their feet on the company side. Let's see, pilot option sit field standby after loss of flying. We talked about this. The pilot who asked about line holders being able to sit field standby. This is today. They can require a pilot to sit field standby. Going forward, it's only voluntary. This is the opportunity for a line holder to sit field standby if they so choose, and it pays 3 hours of ad pay whether you end up flying or not. Loss of flying modified. So 20 F1B, this is if you lose your originating segment after you report. The company must exercise one of the options within the following time period. So today, it's always 2 hours. What we've gone to here, it's a modification. So you decide, but we've gone to hybrid model. So green, hub condition green. If you want to see what that looks like, go on Flying Together, bottom right, map of the United States, the hubs, and they'll be color coded. So the deal here is we look for something that is visible to the pilot group, something that the crew scheduler can't individually manipulate. They don't have a toggle switch on their desktop where they can go, oh, I forgot to reassign this pilot. Let me turn it red. They can't do this. This is independently verifiable by the system scheduling committee, the operational team, the crew desk pilots. there's a manager's log that when a hub goes into one of these conditions, the manager is required to log it on there, the reason for it, and it requires frequent updates. So they can't turn Newark red January 1st and then just keep it there till December 31st. Yeah, well, they have to justify it, okay? So the real win here, guys, is instead of 2 hours being the standard, 1 hour is going to be the standard. If it goes to gray or yellow, 2 hours will be the standard. And when it's in meltdown mode, blue and red, it's 3 hours. So the majority of the time, it should be in one. That's the game there. And days where there's fog or the occasional non-Newark event somewhere, it goes to yellow. That's 2 hours.
We have 4 green and 3 gray right now.
Okay, good. Thanks. So 20F2, loss of flying. This provides a lot of clarification where there is very little today. So the new language covers when a scheduler fails to contact a pilot within a defined time period, and then clearly delineates pilot's obligation when the reassignment ends. So for our hotliner, who's on the hotline in here? Raise your hand. So awesome job, guys. Thanks for stepping up and doing what you do. So this should be very familiar to you. This is when a hub or some station is in meltdown mode, really just a crew desk is in meltdown mode because you may be sunny and wherever you're at. And when communication ceases, when you can't get a hold of the crew desk, I've lost flying, what's the expectation? Our friends in grievance tell us what's expected of us. The contract interp and admin team tells us what's expected of us. The problem is we don't have something that we can point to a defined plan for every pilot to follow where they're protected. And it also ratchets up the pressure on the company that if they mess around and don't get us rescheduled and moving in the right direction, that their options dwindle. That's the goal here. So today there's no time limit by which the company must reassign you. So you can languish at the airport. The contract is silent on that, unfortunately, especially if you're at an outstation. If you're at an outstation, you don't have a lot of options. You're trying to get a hold of the crew desk. You're trying to get a hold of the FODM. When do you enter rest? When are you available to get moving again? And again, we pointed out, look, our pilots are professionals. They have no problem showing up, suited up, ready to go. But when you lose them, nothing speaks louder than when you lose us around the system and you have no plan for us. And then we're on the down end of that. You're reassigning us just because you lost us for 18 hours and we're losing time at home. So this is how this is covered. So a pilot who loses flying after their originating leg in a base. So let's say let's use Newark. Let's say you're supposed to do a Boston turn out of Newark and go to Tampa for the overnight. So if you lose flying in the base, so you lose the Orlando overnight. So you've done the Boston turn, you're sitting in Newark. You have to wait at the airport for 2 hours for a reassignment. After that point, in your base, if they have no additional flying, then you're released after that 2 hours. Or if they have additional, and I'll cover, not released completely, but we'll get there. The pilot has additional flying from that location in their current trip, then you're released to that flying. So if you're in your base, you've done the Boston turn. Tonight, you're supposed to do Boston to Tampa, and tomorrow, you're supposed to come back up through Newark and go to Punta Cana or something like that. You're released to the Punta Cana leg. That's what your obligation is. You can go home. If you need a hotel, you can get that. If, however, you were, let's say you're supposed to do the Boston turn and then you don't come back through your base until the end of that trip. You're supposed to go out to the West Coast, do some Denver flying, whatever. If you have no other flying that touches that base, you're released for the rest of the trip. For the rest of the trip? Oh. No, you're not entitled to a hotel room because you don't have an off-duty period in that trip, and so you're released.
But when they screw this up, which they will, they're going to lose a pilot potentially for 2 days, 2, 3, and 4. Good.
Call it motivation.
Yeah.
Okay. We're not done yet. Okay. So this is a decade of work to get this right. So, okay, a pilot who loses flying after the originating leg out of the base only has to wait at the airport for 2 hours for the reassignment. Then, if the pilot has additional flying from that, so this is this could be labeled better. This is at an outstation, correct? Yes. Okay. Sorry. Let me get my mind right. Okay. So now let's say you're in Boston. You fly Newark, Boston, and your Boston Newark flight has canceled. and you can't get a hold of them. What's the plan? What are you supposed to be doing? So this pilot needs to wait at the Boston airport for 2 hours for a reassignment. Then if the pilot has additional flying from that location in their trip, they're released to that flying. So if for some reason you're just doing Boston turns the rest of the trip, you'd pick up at the next Boston turn that wasn't canceled out of Boston. Or if you don't have any more Boston flying, you were going to fly Boston to Newark and never see Boston again that trip, you would go to a hotel. You're subject to reassignment until the end of that planned duty day. So let's say your flying cancels at 5 p.m. and you're supposed to get done flying for the day at 11 p.m. 5 p.m. plus 2 hours, 7 p.m. They don't have anything for you. You go to the hotel in Boston. They're supposed to provide you a hotel. If they don't provide you a hotel, we have self-help already prescribed in our contract. You go to the hotel, you're required to remain phone available, until 2300. That's the end of your normal duty day. But you're done. You're at the hotel. The reassignment must start after the layover. So they can't say, hey, head back to the airport. We need you to fly to Pittsburgh or Dulles or something like that. If they don't reassign you by the end of that planned duty period by 2300, you're placed into rest. How long is your rest? It's the default of either 12 hours or, so do you see that on there? Okay, thanks. I thought it was somebody out here. How'd they know that? 12 hours or 7 a.m., whichever is later. So if it's 11 p.m. at night, you're put into bed for 12 hours since 11 a.m. Steve told me. It's in the language. It's in the contractual language. Okay, so 7 a.m. or 11 a.m., the 12 hours after 2300, whichever is later. So you're in rest until 11 a.m. You wake up at 11 a.m. If they don't have a reassignment on your schedule, the only thing they can do with you at that point is deadhead you back to your base. So you would be released at that time. If they do have a reassignment on your schedule, they have to get you back within the footprint of your trip. They can't say, hey, we messed around, we didn't get something on your schedule, but now we're going to reassign you into your day off, because by the time we got around to you, we had a mess on our hands, and we're going to send you into your days off. Yeah.
Just from an FAR 117.
Yeah.
Rest has always got to be prospective. So when you go to bed at 11 o'clock at night, invariably in the middle of the night, the modifier schedule, let's say at 5 a.m. Well, 7 a.m. or 12 hours later, that's 11 to 11. If it was modified at 7 a.m., we've only got 4 hours between when that 12-hour rest. So we don't get our 10 hours FAA prospective rest.
Your duty would start at 11 a.m. So if they mess around and say, okay, you're going to fly out of Boston at 2:30, your FDP will start at 11 a.m. because your prospective rest began at 11 p.m. and you're good to start after that 12 hours at 11 a.m.
What I'm saying is, how is it prospective if there's no update to our master schedule? I have to be able to see a pairing to know what my rest is.
Because your next obligation to the company is at 11 a.m.
You basically are going on a phone availability and say, look, I
Yes. Yes. Yep. So next up is if they do reassign you, you have to get back by the last day of the original pairing, not the following day by noon or the following day by 23:59, which is a current book. Okay, and if the no reassignment is made by the end of the layover, the company must deadhead the pilot home and release them. So there's no, sorry, we forgot about you, but we'd like for you to continue working. Okay, cancellation of training assignment for line holders. If the cancellation and schedule is reconstructed prior to 1300 on the first day, you'll be given blocks of AV days for the training footprint. This is a change from current book. Current book today says you'd have blocks of telephone availability days, 4 hours in length. So you're basically on short call. It's really detrimental to our pilots who commute and don't live in base. You're basically a reserve. Now, to be fair, that process changed during the pandemic. We use 20 F10 alternative means of compliance, and it's been wildly popular. I don't know of a pilot who said, I'd rather have phone availability every day. Just give me a block of AV days, and if they don't use me by 1500, I'm released. Let's see. And if the cancellation is after 1300 on the first day, then you're given a single day of telephone availability. And if you're not given flying, then you're released. Okay, treatment of contiguous blocks of AV days. So this would be an example would be if you lose back-to-back 2-day trips. Today you would have, those are considered 2 blocks of AV days, which would incur 2 separate obligations to check at 1,500 to see if you're released. However, the company could assign you a 4-day trip over those blocks. So kind of went both ways. They had you on the hook for the second block if they didn't use you on the first block, but then they could still assign you a 4-day trip over the entire block. This kind of mixes that into one and says if they're going to be able to have contiguous blocks and assign you a trip over those blocks, then that's a single block and you have a single obligation to check your schedule. A worse story is if you had back-to-back 1-day trips. You would have every day you'd have to check and they would get multiple bites at the apple. This makes it 1 bite at the apple. Okay, prior to splitting open trips, this is something we would see a lot in PDRs from pilots is I was just getting ready to pick up that trip, but they went and split it. And now it's 2 trips and one's moved to a different base. I wanted that trip. And if they would have just waited for a trip trade run, I would have picked it up. This addresses that a trip that becomes open before midnight 1 Central Time on the day prior to report time for the trip, a trip can't be split until it's run through at least 1 trip trade run. Okay, freezing of trips for consolidation. Today, a trip can be frozen for training after it's set in open time for 15 hours and the first trip trade run has occurred. It's 20G5 in the new book. This is 20G6. It's separate for consolidation, but there's some stipulations here. We shorten the timeline. The earliest that they can do this is no more than 10 days out from the beginning of the trip start date. And the open trip must be set aside. It's only for global reserve who requires consolidation. And there's a requirement here that before a trip for training isn't required to run through a trip trade run if it opens up after the first trip trade run of the bid period. So first trip trade run of the bid period today occurs on the 24th. So we'll use dates. So July 24th, if a trip opens up after July 24th and it's within 15 days, today the company can take that trip out of open time, freeze it and use it for training purposes. They can't freeze that trip for consolidation. Consolidation is an issue that they have to manage. What this allows is inside of 10 days, they can freeze a trip for consolidation. But first, if it's a flying first officer or flying captain trip, because captains have to consolidate as well, that trip has to go through a trip trade run before they can freeze it. So the idea here is if a pilot needs to consolidate, they can consolidate on your London trip. If you're doing London's all month long, they can just as easily consolidate on your London trip. So this gives you an opportunity if you want to trade your London for the Dubrovnik, that you have the opportunity to do that before they take that trip and freeze it. That's what this speaks to. Okay, premium pay during Thanksgiving and into your holidays. This was an LOA that's been incorporated into the main body of the agreement. It prevents the company from getting off on the cheap there between November 15th and November 30th for Thanksgiving, and then December 15th through January 3rd for the Christmas and New Year's holidays. They can't use 50 and 75% PPU. They have to use 100% PPU in those periods. Even if a scheduler forgets and puts 50% PPU on there, that trip will pay 100% PPU. We've seen a few of those sneak past the goal and getting those things taken care of. It does not prohibit the requirement of placing 50% ad pay on trips before disrupting reserve days off. We'll get to that. Just put that in the back of your mind. There's one new thing that's coming where the company has to offer PPU on a trip before disrupting a reserve days off. And that is a fixed amount of 50%. That doesn't qualify into this. Okay, 100%, 125% premium pay. This is a new premium pay level that the company can place on a trip that's for a straight pickup, not with a corresponding drop. So if the company has a trip that they want to cover, they can tag it with 125% premium pay, but that premium pay will only be paid if that's part of a straight pickup of the trip, not an exchange where you dump your trip next weekend in order to pick up this trip. That trip will still remain available for pilots to trip trade into, but if you are obtaining that trip via trade, it'll be for straight time, not the 125%. Okay, moving of trips. This is under 28.6 today. There's certain stipulations and qualifiers before the company can move flying from one base to another. That information is in there today to prevent the company from not staffing bases properly. There are 2 changes to this. The first one is natural disaster absence policy. if a pilot had just recently in Florida, our Florida pilots had the ability to do this if they needed to take care of things at home in preparation for the hurricane. If a trip is dropped using this policy, that trip can be moved to another base for coverage, so long as it goes through at least one run of the trip trade system. So a local pilot will have the opportunity to take that trip, but the idea here and what was voiced at the table from the company is this is an issue that is created not by the pilot, obviously, it's a natural disaster, but this is to benefit those pilots, and we want to be able to do that. But now we're going to have a bulk of open flying. For example, in Newark, if there's a snowstorm hitting Newark, they needed the ability to move that flying out. But first they wanted to have we wanted to have, they don't care. We wanted to have the ability for a local pilot to have a shot at that first. Second, moving a trip to a different base will prevent the rolling of a reserves day off. The crew desk can move the trip to another base. There's a couple rules. First, it has to be through at least one trip trade run before that. So if a local pilot says, hey, I'll take it, they have that opportunity. And they can't move that trip to the new base only to disrupt a pilot's days off there. That's how pilots start fighting. Okay. Premium short call trips. Okay, so these are a series of 12-hour short calls that are available to pick up by a line holder or a reserve. We're jumping ahead just a little bit, but spoiler alert, we went to short call caps. The crew desk cannot assign a pilot more than 6 short calls unless the pilot picks up more than 6 short calls. So that's something that we heard loud and clear from our pilots, the abuse of overbuilding short calls. This is a safety valve for that the company negotiated and paid out the nose for. They said, look, if we're capping out, if the pilots in base are hitting the cap and we're concerned about that and we're not able to fill that short call, we need some ability to cover the operation close in. This is a 12-hour short call. So normally a short call window is 14 hours in length. 12 hours is what's specified here. If you need to, it allows you to have an adult beverage, apparently. So initial pay value is 5 hours and 15 minutes of LPV for every short call, plus 5 hours of ad pay per day. So these are pretty rich, 10.5 hours of pay per day of these. Yeah, per day. And that's whether you get used or not. That's limited to 3 days of these for basic categories, 4 days for global categories. If you're in base, we're just talking in base right now. In base pilots can request positive space travel in hotels if you need it. So if you're a commuter and you're staring down an undesirable trip and this is in there and you're on reserve or you're a line holder, you're going to pick up, say, a 3-day version of this short call. That's 31 hours and 30 minutes. And they're going to take care of hotel and travel. Cannot be involuntary assigned to a reserve in that base. So you're not subject to involuntary assignment here. If the trip's not picked up in base with the premium, it can be moved to another base. And when it's moved to another base, deadheads are attached on both ends, and we'll get to that. Now it becomes that three-day stint of sitting short call in Houston, for example. They move that to Denver. That now becomes a 5-day trip with deadheads on both ends. To make sure that they don't run the airline like this, every 9 occurrences of having these, the company has to offer an additional vacancy in that category. So this is similar to 28.6 that they have to do. Okay, so now a premium short call, a string of these, how do they become a trip? This is when they move these to another base. Again, series of 12-hour short calls not picked up. These are assignable to a reserve. So that Denver pilot, when those Houston short calls are moved to Denver, a Denver reserve can be assigned to these. That is considered a trip now because it has a deadhead on day 1 and a deadhead on day last. And the short calls in the middle, again, the reserve or the line holder are all entitled to 515 of LPV and 515 of ad pay for that trip. So now that 31.5 hour became 50, yeah, 50 something hours. Oh, come on. No, really. Yeah. To be fair, Tim, we did leave that on the table. Sorry. Okay, so they're built initially with a dead on the first day and the last day of the trip. We say initially because you can be assigned off that short call to fly on day last. they do have to get you back to your base on day last. So that day is available for assignment. The thought process there is they bought and paid for that with the 10.5 hours. And if you're a line holder in that other base, it was voluntary to pick that up. So the pilot can give an assignment that returns to flying on the pilot's base on the last day. The reserve must concur to any assignment that would extend into days off. So if you get one of these, this is kind of a surefire bet that you're not going to get your day off rolled, because once you're attached to this, they have to get you back on that last day. Limited 3, 4, and 5 day trips for basic. That conforms with the number of short calls in a row that you can have of 3. For global, it's going to be a 4, 5, or 6 day trip with the number of max number of call periods is 4. The pilot will be provided hotels in a downtown location, so they can't strand you at the airport for this. And see, the reassignment limits are based on the release time of the trip when assigned while on short call. So the trip, if you're deadhead back to base, is say 11 a.m. So that's before noon. So for a reserve, if you get reassigned, if you get flying, they have to schedule you to get back on your last day. Let's make it Monday through Friday. Monday, you deadhead to Denver, or you're in Denver, you're deadheading Houston. Monday, you deadhead to Houston. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you sit reserve in Houston. Friday, you're scheduled to deadhead back to Denver and land at 11 a.m. If they give you flying in Houston, that flying has to be scheduled to get you back to Denver by Friday at 23:59. Now you're out in the system, normal reassignment rules apply, but what is your limit? How far out can they keep you? As a reserve, your assignment limit there is based on 11 a.m. on Friday. So your 20L2A limit, you got to get back by noon on Saturday. That's how that's anchored. And as far as your overtime ad pay, and we'll get to the overtime ad pay, that's going to be calculated on the original deadhead time back to base. So you're going to be, so there's your extra pay. If you get back to base after 11 a.m., anything on the actual day of the deadhead, your first 2 hours are free, then you're at a 1 for 3 rig until midnight. Anything after that is a 1 for 2 rig. Okay, reassignment pay. This is 20I5A4 today. This is something that disappeared in TA1. It is back. This is the first step of reassignment for a line holder. You can be reassigned under this section if another pilot is misconnecting inbound, if a pilot fails to report. This is the most common reassignment that we see out there. You're coming into the base, everything's looking good, but another pilot is misconnecting. And it just so happens that the crew desk sees that and is going to have you go to Boise instead of that pilot, and they're going to absolve your sit that you had in Denver, and they're going to go somewhere else. The company today has to pay 30 minutes of ad pay for that convenience. And if you get back a day early, that ad pay goes away. If you're 20L6 late or day off pay today, subsumes that 30 minutes, you never see it. What this does is this increases the 30 minutes to 1 hour and is not able to be offset. So if you get back a day early, you still get the 1 hour. And if you get back late and your overtime pay is worth more than the 1 hour, you still keep the 1 hour. Yes. Yes. Yep. Reassignment documentation. This is more for the, well, it's for every pilot, but this is really for our crew desk pilots. This requires the crew desk to document the details on that misconnection that's happening, because this is a real barrier to track back down after this happens. What crew is misconnecting inbound? The real reason why we need this is for our crew desk pilots and our line pilots to really be able to dig in there and see if they reassigned you properly under this section. Because if they were reassigning you to really cover an originating segment, they were getting off on the cheap. And instead of giving you 1 hour of ad pay, they need to give you 125% ad pay. Pretty stark difference. And we do the work, we're happy to do it, but it takes a lot of time and resources to do that. So now this requires them, and hopefully in doing so, they would catch that, oh, this is really an untriggered reassignment under 20I9. I should put the right pay in there, and then we don't have this problem. Okay, part 1 of 4, and Marty said no more questions. Sorry, you guys took too long asking questions. Hey, Steve Radican.
All right, so we're going to get into one section that I know is near and dear to my heart, Scott. The other hotline volunteers, the crew desk guys. If you open your black line to, I think it's page 272, we're pretty proud of this. One of the issues that our pilots have is that they find the current book language confusing, which I don't disagree with. So the attempt was tried to make something that's understandable to both the pilots and the schedulers or anyone else that's in our system that needs to know who should be assigned a trip, when they should be assigned a trip, and how they should be assigned a trip. So you're going to find 4 assignment ladders in there based on the type of assignment that's being made at a given time. And the hope here is that this will provide a more rigid and predictable assignment order for our reserves. You're going to see in a second, we've gone with the 52 flavors of Baskin-Robbins reserve types. We have 16,000 pilots at any given time. 20% of them are going to be on reserve. And we have found that of those 20%, their needs, their desires, their wants in a reserve program are vastly different. I'll tangent off this for a second, but I think it displays the case. Several years ago, due to the overbuilding of short calls, the managing director of crew scheduling bought off on a plan to take one category and reduce the number of short calls that were built in that category. In that month, our PDR volume flipped 180 degrees from why are they building so many short calls to where did all the short calls go? I rely on that MPG to feed my family. And so we understand that there's a balance there. Some people love these things, some people hate them. So we're really worked hard to drive those assignments to those people that want them rather than a carte blanche, one size fits all approach. So setting that stage, we'll kind of dive into this a little bit. So minimum disruption of days off was our top priority when we looked at constructing a reserve plan going forward. So for trip assignments, what you're going to find is it's going to go long call, then short call, then a voluntary field standby. Current book today, the crew desk gets to choose whether they want to assign it to a long call, short call, then field standby. We have eliminated that choice. So within the same type of reserve, so if we're all in this room long calls or we're all short calls, the priority for open trips is long call only first, traditional reserves, which is a nomenclature we use, and then lastly, VEC, VSC. And we'll talk about what those are here in a second. You can read for short call assignment to flips that a little bit. So this is the priority for short calls or VECs or VSCs, and then traditional reserves. And what you're going to find, spoiler alert, the long call only pilots can't be assigned short calls. So if you are a commuter or you don't like being stuck to a phone for a 2.5 hour call out, there's a plan for you. So if disruption is required, they're sorted by days of disruption. And then we're going to allow reserves to raise their hand and go, hey, you know what? I don't mind if you disrupt my Thursday or Friday. For doing that, we're going to give you $5.15 of ad pay for each disrupted day. So the idea is to motivate these assignments to pilots that want them versus those pilots that don't want them. If there are no reserves that raise their hand and say, I would like my day off disrupted for $5.15, we're going to force the company to tag that trip with 50% PPU. It's going to have to go through a trip trade run, 50% PPU, and then unfortunately we'll get to the point where we're back into the rolled day world. However, that pilot's going to get not only the pay for the rolled day, but he's also going to get 5 hours and 15 minutes of ad pay for that rolled day. So the supplement, or I guess they put that in your the complete ladders in your supplement packet. It's certainly worth taking a look at. I think it really breaks down the contractual language into a visible assignment ladder, for lack of better words. There, questions? I'm not allowed to take questions, but I will take a quick question if anyone has one. Perfect. All right. Yeah, they are all quick. The same assignment restrictions apply. We have beefed them up a little bit. So still one short call field standby per day. Any out of silo assignment must first go to the APU out of assignment request list. Can't assign to reserve until he returns from a trip. No assigning on the last day following jury duty, union business, company business. No WACL first day period following WACL in your last duty pay period. And then you guys can certainly read the rest. Give me a second. Voluntary. There's still voluntary field standby. So we have to leave that in the book because that will be confusing if we take it out. No, don't be sorry. Rolled reserve day off pay. So a reserve will now receive 5 hours and 15 minutes of ad pay per disrupted day off for a reserve assignment. And a reserve will also receive 5 hours and 50 minutes of ad pay per a line holder day off disrupted for a reserve assignment. We're coming to the end of the month. Those are different events. So they're not stackable. those are different events. So that ad pay does not apply if the pilot made themselves available and they're given a VDO assignment. So there's other ways around that. Soaking of short calls. So this is another penalty for the company for their bad behavior or mismanagement, as Andy would say. So the company can assign a short call that has not been open for an hour to reserve on short call in order to make the notification timeline. In doing so, they incur a 1 hour of ad pay penalty to the pilot that it's assigned that short call. So there's an example there that will help you kind of understand that concept and the penalty and the behavior it's trying to drive. All right, hotels for reserves when given add-on flying on their base. This is a PDR we get quite a bit. So under 20I6H1, there's a provision where I can be given add-on flying. Currently, you're at your base, so you're not entitled to a hotel room. Under this agreement, the company will have to provide a hotel room for that pilot. Pilot option on reassignment that touched the pilot's base. So in this case, a reassignment pilot will have the option to remove from a reassignment when the reassignment returns the pilot to base on or after the last day of the originating trip, provided the reassignment was made prior to 1400, the day prior to the end of the pilot's originating trip. Excuse me. Let me give you an example on that makes it pretty clear. So a second day of a 4-day trip, 20I5 reassignment, and they changed the last day, and they're rolling me into the day, and now I do Chicago, Newark, Newark, Boston, Boston back to Newark. So they tagged that last Boston turn. I can raise my hand and say, I had plans on Saturday afternoon. I want off the Boston turn. Since that reassignment happened before 1400, the day prior to my last day of the trip, they'll peel that Boston turn off, and then I will be responsible for flying the airplane from Chicago to Newark, and I walk off the jet on my last day or on my day off. So as long as that subsequent, that kind of last turn that we see has been reassigned before 1400. So it's really the assignment window the day before, just to, if you're wondering where that 1400 came from, then we can request to have that pulled off. Commuting assistance when reassigned. So this is another just tool that we can put in our pilot's tool belt. So a pilot who's reassigned is scheduled or results in a return to their base after their originally scheduled release time, which has left them less than 2 hours prior to departure time of the last online flight to their home of record, will be given a positive space pass on that flight. They're always entitled to the hotel. So such request, if the pilot is scheduled to arrive or actually arrives too late to utilize positive space travel on the same day, the pilot shall be provided a hotel upon request. So we were able to get this also to apply for AV flying, for replacement flying over AV days. No. So as long as you were that reassignment, so if you were reserve and you got a reassignment and you met this, then you would also be able to grab those entitlements. So this is our first voluntary program. So voluntary long call only lines. So as the name implies, this is only awarded to volunteers. You can't be forced into a long call only line. It can't be involuntary assigned to short calls. However, you can pick them up. You can't be involuntary assigned to start before 10 a.m. on your first day of reserve, which is standard across the book now. Their aggressive pickup window and assignment window is going to be slightly different than the balance of the reserve. So their window opens earlier. Again, we're trying to drive more predictability into this reserve program. So they're going to open at 10 and their assignment window is going to be 10:15 to 10:44. This is based on a percentage of reserves that are available in the category. They enjoy a 14-hour call out during the assignment window, and all other times they're an 18-hour call out. This is a chart that you'll find in the agreement, and this drives based on how many reserves are available in your category, how many of these lines they have to offer. So if you are at 21% of reserves, then they have to offer 17% of the pilots, of reserve pilots, an opportunity to have a long call only line. So to counterbalance that, so this is where we're trying to match pilots with different wants, desires, needs. We have voluntary early check lines. These are intended for the pilots that live in base, that don't mind sitting short calls, that want an opportunity that to make money that may be afforded to the line holders. So only awarded to volunteers again. We can't be forced into a VC. You can be assigned short calls. We don't have a cap on those. So as Andy alluded to, there is a short call cap coming up for traditional line for traditional reserves. We can be assigned prior to 10 a.m. on our first day reserve. And we do have an obligation to check on our last day between 1600 and 1759. So what do we get for that? So we are obviously giving the company some flexibility to our reserve schedule. So you get 2 hours of ad pay for your original block of reserve awarded. So what that means is if I get a PBS schedule that has 4 blocks of reserve, that means I'm going to have 4 10 a.m. pre 10 a.m. obligations to the company. So 4 of my days off, I'm going to have to check my schedule. For that, I get 2 hours of ad pay. So right off the bat, when I get my schedule, I have 8 hours of ad pay in the bank. So 4 blocks, 2 hours a day. Yeah, per block I get. So that's scheduled, right? So if things happen in the operation, you already have that in the bank. 15 minutes of ad pay per reserve day. So 18 or 17, and I'll show you a chart in a minute how we're going to get to all this, but you're going to get 15 minutes of ad pay for the lower notification time that I'll talk about here in a second. So if I'm awarded a VEC line, I also have another little chit for me. I'm able to be awarded 1 less reserve day. Now that comes with a day of reduced MPG, but if you start looking in some of our shoulder months where we're already getting the additional day off, a VEC can elect to go, hey, I want another day off out of the bank, right out of the back. So the company must make VECs available to a minimum of 15% of each narrow body reserve category, as long as the majority of flying is basic. That carve outs for Cleveland. Company discretion to make it available for all categories. And while on long call, a VEC's call out time is 12 hours. Again, this is designed to counterbalance the long call only guys. So when we look at a couple scenarios for how this plays out, you can just see what the impact is. So I'll leave this up here for a second. And the bottom shows the interaction of vacation within those bid periods. So they're pretty lucrative.
No kidding.
If that's your thing. All right, so then we have another flavor, voluntary short call lines. So you're probably going to sit there and go, well, what's the difference between a voluntary short call line and a VEC? You're very astute. The VEC is designed for categories with early reports. There are categories out there, Houston 756, where the majority of those departures are in the evening down to South America. They don't need VECs. At least the company at this point in time doesn't believe they need VECs. So they wanted another program for those guys. So again, this is a voluntary program, can't be forced into a VEC, but you are just waiving your short call cap. So you're going to be assigned short calls, no cap on the number of short calls. You, however, cannot be assigned prior to 10 a.m. on your first day reserve. The additional compensation here is 20 minutes of additional MPG per reserve, just a little different. And the reason for that, which is different than the 15 minutes of ad pay, is the VEC will still enjoy the 18-hour call out. It doesn't have a cap on short calls. The intent is that you will spend the majority of your time on short call. However, if they forget to call you and release you, you go back to the 18-hour call out. So that's what this would look like.
I think it's got the wrong.
What's that?
I had the wrong title.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. Fix that.
But it's a VSC.
it is a VSC. Which, oh, this is my last one. All right, reserve assignment into line holder days off. It's the end of the month. So inevitably the crew desk guys are busy answering these, and it is soul crushing to have to answer these currently. However, fortunately, we've given a path to hopefully solve this problem going forward. So new book, if at the time of assignment there are no other reserves available without disrupting days off, a reserve can be assigned into line holder days off. We fought to prevent this entirely Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful. So here's what we were able to get. So a reserve will be removed, similar to what we talked about earlier, from any flying anytime it passes through their base. If there is more than one, as long as there is more than one unassigned reserve available to complete the trip. However, the reserve can obviously continue to operate the foot trip. We didn't want to take away the ad pay. Some pilots might sit there and say, hey, I didn't have plans anyway. I don't mind flying the trip. And all the other accoutrements in the ladder still exist. They still have to seek volunteers. They still have to tag it with PPU. They still have to run through that entire assignment ladder until they get down to a reserve assignment into a line holder day off. So reserve shall receive 5 hours and 15 minutes of ad pay for each day off that was disrupted at the time of assignment, or, and this is a big win that we don't currently have in our book, a pilot can elect to have that day off in the line holder bid period restored in accordance with 20K, which I think is 20N. 20N. Let me keep going or? Okay. All right, so, oh.
How is it gonna be like? No, I'll head home. Where we at?
1,400 or later. 1,400 or later.
This is the volunteer portion of the event. Okay, you guys should have a handout in on the left side of your packets that has a bunch of one spreadsheet on one side that's without vacation and one that is with. I'll see it when somebody holds it up. Yes, okay. That's kind of a expanded version of that table that he showed before that will show the optionality if a pilot elects to, which type of reserve they're awarded, if they elect to have the additional day off, if it's a vacation month, things like that. So you can see how many days off. Current book is along the top, black background with white ink. Well, not white ink, but black background, and then you can compare it to the ones below. And this is something like the fact team. This is so that people don't have to do back of the napkin math or sound like you're selling it. It's just, it is what it is. Pick what you like, that sort of thing. Okay. All right, we'll keep going. We're doing good. We have right at 100 slides left, so we're doing good. But hey, we're over 2/3 of the way done. And we got tons of time. 1,400 later, short call on the last day of reserve. This is an improvement. Today, going forward, you have to concur to a short call that begins at or after 1,400 if you only have one day available. And days available for reserve assignment include RDOs and FDO. A reserve release to a training trip or a line check. So it's a modification of a current section listed there. The earliest of if the pilot has days off to prior to the trip, you're released to the trip. 10 hours prior to the trip's report time, or if the company's notified you that you're released. So the earliest of those things, that's when a reserve is released to the trip. Open trips set aside using this section, or a trip that's been FBO'd, it can be assigned to a reserve for training or line check airmen at any time. Reserve trading options. This is new. So foot stomp on this. New language will allow 2 reserves to trade trips with company concurrence. Okay, I know we all hate company concurrence and we all think it means they'll say no to everything. That's not what this means. But what it does mean is that if there are 2 pilots in the base that were given trips on reserve, number one, they're going to have to come to an agreement themselves, make contact with each other and say, we want to trade the trips. It has to work. It can't generate any ad pays for one that wasn't there. The company is not going to pay additional for this. But I can tell you when I was new in Houston, there was a 30-hour Caracas and a 30-hour Tulsa layover that came into open time, and I got Caracas, and I live in Tulsa, and I spent the weekend in Caracas. So that would have been awesome. I still would have had to talk the other pilot into Caracas. But assuming that pilot wanted to go to Caracas, there would have been an opportunity possibly for both of us to be happy, for it to be mutually beneficial or no change for the company, and for both pilots to walk away happy. So that's the goal. This is chipping away at it right now. This is how sometimes we get our foot in the door. If we can't get at the pilot's discretion, the first thing that we get is something that we haven't had before with company concurrence. And the next time we go up to bat, we're going after the the pilot's ability. Reserves will be allowed to trade reserve days with other reserves. So today, reserves have to call up on the 24th of the month at 1500. Jeez, I've lost a lot. Okay. 12? 25th? Okay, 25th at a specified time. Stop. That's not helpful. Okay, these are all the guys I worked with like 3 months ago hosing me. Okay, anyways, back to it. Today, that's a manual process. It's going to be subject to futures desk staffing. Every pilot is calling in at the same time. So you can imagine how hold times work, especially in bid periods where pilots are trying to move their days off around, especially in the holiday bid periods where pilots will bid down to reserve who don't normally hold reserve, but bid reserve to get the holidays off. What this allows is not just saying, talking to the crew desk and saying, can I move my Monday to Friday? And then say, no, we're below coverage both days. We're not gonna allow that to happen. What this brings in is a technological aspect that we have in trip trade today, like a branching type logic, where if I want to move my Monday through Friday and Tim wants to move his Friday to Monday, we should be able to do that if it doesn't create a single day off, for example, or a problem where that reserve block is useless. We ought to be able to be making matches, even if I don't know Tim or know what he wants, that ability to make that happen. So that's what this is patterned after. The flight attendants have something similar. Obviously, flight attendants have different work rules and different FARs that they have to worry about. But the technology exists out there. It needs to be modified to work with our work rules and the FARs. But this is something that we were able to achieve. So this will not go live on Saturday, the 30th of September if this deal passes. It will take a little bit of time. But again, this is a step forward to let reserves have additional quality of life. Okay, long call reserve call out times. So between 12 noon and 13:59, long call has a 14-hour notice required prior to the time of a trip or the start of a short call. So this is not long call only, because long call only cannot be assigned a short call. They would have to have a 14-hour notice just for a trip. All other times on reserve with long call, they get an 18-hour notice to report for a trip. Today, a lot of pilots think it's 13 hours to report, it's 13 hours to depart. So really it's 12 hours notice. So this goes to 18. This matches our peers at Delta. Really, when we talk about call out times, what we're really after and what we've analyzed based on pilot feedback is there's this, we call it the danger zone, just with Top Gun. So there's this window where if you commute, especially for commuters, that even if you wanted to, you couldn't make it in. So if they call you tonight at 1700, the last flight to your base is left, and they give you a 6 a.m. report, you're hosed. So what good is that 13-hour call out? It's really, you're going to have to go to your base on the last flight of the night anyways, no matter what's happening. What we do with the stair stepping here is it allows you to avoid the danger zone. So if you're called at 1 p.m. and you have to have a 14-hour notice, so that's 3 a.m. Okay, well, currently we don't have any 3 a.m. trips, but the thought process here is we don't build this contract for what the current flight schedule is in case something happens in the future. So with the average pilot and our flight schedule being called at 1300, the majority of our pilots that commute still have two options to get to their base and be in position for a 3 a.m. start. We didn't run this through fatigue modeling for every pilot and what hotel they would use and things like that. This is not set up for the pilot that commutes from Frankfurt, things like that. This is the average United pilot, okay? And all those things exist. That's why I'm still throwing those out there. The min call out time for a short call is 16 hours. The thought process there is 16 hours to the start of a short call. Then you get a 2.5-hour call out off that. So really a long call pilot who's assigned to a short call, worst case scenario is an 18.5-hour call out before they have to be at the airport. Does that make sense? 16 plus 2.5. There's something else there for pilots that we've negotiated the ability to commute during that 2.5-hour window as well. We'll get to that. Okay, voluntary early check reserve. They have a 12-hour call out when on long call. So if you're on short call as a VEC pilot, normal short call rules apply. If you don't get a short call, you're on long call, but in exchange for that 15 minutes of ad pay, you have a little bit shorter call out window or call out time of 12 hours. And the exception there is an assignment made on the last day off. A VEC requires 14 hours notice there. That's to preserve. So remember, a VEC pilot has to check their schedule between 4 p.m. and 17:59 on their last day off. So worst case scenario, 17:59, 14 hours get you in at 8 a.m. there. Okay. Long call reserve release. We talked about starting long call. This is when you get released. A long call reserve will be released at 1400 on their last day. If the next day has flying, training, FDO, or line holder days off. And a reserve on long call is released at 6 a.m. on their last day of reserve in all other scenarios. Okay. Canceling short call early to be placed on long call. Somebody, I forget who, but texted me this. So I think I already answered you, and here's your other answer. A reserve, you have to concur to being canceled on short call, only be placed on another short call. This is an abuse that takes place today, where they might not be able to assign you that short call, or you wouldn't normally be up for that short call, but they call you while on short call. You're released to long call. 5 minutes later, they call you, hey, now you're on long call. This is your new assignment. This prevents that. You have to concur to that. And then the bullet point says what that prevents them from doing. Short call reserve release. Reserve on short call is released at 1400 on the last day of reserve, unless they have an assignment or have been notified to complete the short call. Today, that's 1500, so we moved it back an hour, get released an hour earlier. It does not apply to a pilot who picks up short call begins after 1400. Okay, short call cap. Traditional reserve cannot be assigned a short call above the cap below. This is prorated, so if you're available for the full bid period, the maximum number of short calls that you can be assigned is 6. You pick up 3 and they assign 3, you still have a headroom of 3 for the cap. Yes.
So
Oh,
these are 3 or 6.
assigned. Assigned. Yep. Assigned.
Doesn't matter if I use or unused, it's 6.
It's assigned. Yep. Yep. Okay, so in silo, when making short call assignments to a traditional reserve, the company will bypass the reserve that has a higher short call headroom ratio, something we made up. Otherwise known as leveling. The idea here is if I'm at 5, I'm gonna avoid math. We'll use the example. Okay, so the company will bypass, let's say a reserve has 2 remaining short calls available. So they're at 4 for the cap, and they have 2 remaining available, and they have 8 days of reserve remaining. There's a ratio there where that pilot is different than a pilot who has a headroom of 2 and only 2 reserve days remaining, obviously. So you do the ratio there, and the pilot who has more headroom is going to be assigned the short call. If you want the short call, you should aggressively pick it up. That's the idea there. This is built for the pilot who does not want to be forced to short call, pilot who does not want to be tethered to their base with a 2.5-hour leash. Okay, the company is unable to assign, if the company is unable to assign the required short calls, put a short call matrix, required, not flex. I'll explain that in just a second. For 3 consecutive months, the company may opt to reduce the long call lines in that category for the following 3 months by balancing with VEC and VSC with long call. The idea here is if for some reason they are continuing to hit the cap, pilots are hitting the cap and they are not able to assign short calls. And with that inability to assign the short call, they have to demonstrate that it's a problem. So let's start with the matrix first. The matrix, there's a matrix in use today. The pilots don't get to see it. The SSC gets to see it. We get to make comments on it. We don't get to jointly develop it. Going forward, the SSC gets to jointly develop it with the crew resources team. Has to be based on actual departures out of that city. It has to make sense. They can't have 2 a.m. short calls if the first flight out of the base is at 7 a.m. Things like that. Things that have to make sense. They can do there's two matrix really are required, and then a flex. Flex is if there's a snowstorm hitting the base, you can go up to these numbers. It makes sense based on the banks in that hub. If they offer long call lines and voluntary early check and voluntary short call, they offer the whole platter out there. And for some reason they're continuing to hit cap, they have the ability to throttle back the number of long call only. The thought process is a long call only is the biggest hurdle to them because those pilots can accept 0. So for every long call pilot that can accept 0, someone in the system theoretically needs to be able to take 6. That's why you have the voluntary short call or the voluntary early check. That's where those additional short calls go. If they need to, they can throttle those back, but they have to balance with VEC and VSC. So they can't pull back voluntary the long call only lines, they can't just pull those back. If there's a subscription for pilots to do VSC and VEC, those are counterbalancing, they have to honor that. So really the big threat here that could cause this is in a category where there's high subscription for long call only and very low subscription for VEC and VSC. That would be what we would anticipate would drive that. People who aren't able to take an uncapped and a group of people over here who are highly capped. So that's the thought there. And during this time, I mean, they're communicating, there's monthly SSC meetings. This will be obvious to the people who monitor it. There's a lot of accountability here with it. The short call cap does not apply to the premium short call reserve trips. We covered those before, the 10.5 hour a day ones, voluntary early check, VSC, or compressed reserve lines. Ad pay for uncounted short call cap. So the company can offer this ad pay to a reserve to accept a short call, but the short call not count towards the cap. It's 2 hours of ad pay. So if they, let's say they've taken it in the shorts in Newark the first half of the month, they've used a lot of short calls to cover that, and they look at their matrix and where they're trending, and it looks like towards the end of the month they're going to cap out. If they want to get out ahead of it, they've got a couple options. If they are unable to build a short call that day because everyone is capped out, they have those short calls that they can build for 10.5 hours a day. Remember, they can only build those when they can't assign that short call to someone else, because eventually that can be sent out of base and require someone else to do it. So that's only a break glass if needed. The next option to them, if they want to get ahead of the power curve or climb back on the power curve, is offer these short calls of 2 hours of ad pay. So that's the deal there. And if you take one of those at the 2 hours of ad pay, it's uncapped. That they can do this if you are next up for a short call. They can say, hey, the short call is coming your way. It's going to be assigned. You can pick it up for 2 hours and it doesn't hit the cap. Or if you take it, it's going to hit the cap, but you don't get the premium pay. That's the idea behind it. Okay. Yes, all voluntary. Yeah. The only thing not voluntary about some of this stuff is you're on reserve, you still have to answer the phone. Okay, company can add it at time of assignment to reserve, cover that. Okay, short call matrix, I guess I jumped ahead a little bit. This covers short call matrix, who will oversee it, and who will keep track of it and stay on top of it. Oh, and the big thing here, the big change is this is going to be published every bid period that pilots can see it. What this brings is the accountability of not just our SSC team, but getting 16,000 eyes on it. This has been very helpful when somebody at the crew desk accidentally fat fingers something, and it's an honest mistake. I mean, you're using green screens down there. So they accidentally build, a dozen 6 a.m. short calls in a category tomorrow. It's very helpful for somebody to pick up the phone and say, you didn't mean to do that, right? Now, people may wait since there's ad pay and MPG incentive if you were to pick those up. But the idea is if you're getting assigned the third one of those and they really only needed one according to the matrix, you can say, hey, I don't think this is correct. And the SSC guys have been very successful in getting those, even after a pilot's been assigned to it, getting them pulled off because that was an incorrect assignment. Okay, first day of reserve. This is an improvement on the day following a day off. You're not required to report for an assignment or begin a short call prior to 10 a.m. This is something that's codified going forward. This is something that was less than popular in TA1. Real quick example of how we got here. In the UPA that we signed 11 years ago, the company negotiated and ALPA agreed for reserves to be available as early as 6 a.m. coming from days off. The conflict that occurred there was that FAR 117 came into play about like 14 or 15 months later. And not everything in the agreement that we agreed to, the company agreed to, was harmonized with the new FARs. And what we had happen was we had a requirement by the contract for a pilot to check their schedule on their last day off. But under FAR 117, you have to account for that break and rest. You have to account for that time period where the pilot is required to do something, an obligation to the company. It created this window of ambiguity, which eventually, due to the McFadden letter interpretation, came to be known as the 10 a.m. rule around here. So while it was not codified in the contract, if you happen to answer your phone on your last day off at 8 o'clock while you're at dinner with the family, and they said, hey, we got a 7 a.m. assignment for you tomorrow, or 8 a.m. assignment for you tomorrow, that was perfectly legal. They made two-way contact with you. That was a legal assignment. That, hence the reason why pilot said, don't answer your phone on your last day off. All all good things that we've had going on until now. The problem is we're one FAA interpretation letter away from that changing. And to avoid this thing that we've gotten used to that's very beneficial to our reserves, get you one more night at home with your family, to avoid that, we were able to codify that in this TA going forward. That the 10 a.m. rule is now, it's not just a glitch, it's something that's codified in our contract. So the only pilots that are required to check their schedule on their last day off is a VEC pilot. Again, they've signed up for that voluntarily and they're compensated for that. Everyone else, the earliest that they can be required to do anything is 10 a.m. on day one. There's another thing that pilots may not realize today, but today a pilot can be assigned training to include a landings class or a deadhead only flight duty period today and not be in violation of the 10 a.m. rule. And the reason why is because that's a deadhead only duty period. It's not considered a flight duty period under the FARs. You don't have to have the 10 hours prospective rest for that. Doesn't happen very often. More likely to happen for our Denver-based pilots if they're doing a PC fill-in or if they're doing a landings class up there. But it's another thing we're able to codify going forward, that's 10 a.m. for everything. Okay, so assignments made from assignment window. The assignment window is from noon to 13:59. On the last day off, prior to reserve days, they have to be placed on the pilot schedule. Company is not required to notify the pilot in that window. Any assignment made after 1400 on the last day off, it's put on the schedule, on the pilot schedule, and they're required to attempt to notify the pilot by phone. All the reserves other than pilots on VEC require 18 hours notice there because you're starting on that last day off, presumed as a long call pilot. You have to have 18 hours notice or 16 to a short call on the last day off for anything outside of that assignment window. After 1400, you're considered a long call pilot. There's an example on there. Good to proceed. Okay, 6-day basic reserves. Today, a reserve that's in the 6-day silo is limited to picking up a silo or silo -1 assignment. That means that a reserve today on 6-day reserve can pick up a 5-day trip or 6-day trip. If you're flying the 737 or the Airbus today, we don't have very many of those, thankfully. So that really limits the pilot to where they're prevented from picking something up, but the crew desk has access to them to assign something. And we try to level the playing field wherever possible. So we want the ability, if the crew desk can do something to us, we want the pilot to be able to pick their poison first. And that's what we're able to do here. So a pilot on 6 days of reserve, they can pick up an assignment that's 4 days in length if it starts before 10 a.m. Again, not perfect, but it's our foot in the door and we'll keep going from there. Okay, pre-10 a.m., first day of reserve incentives. So a pilot who picks up an assignment that starts prior to 10 a.m. on their first day of reserve, you get 2 hours ad pay if it's a trip, 1 hour of ad pay if it's a short call or field standby. A VEC pilot who's assigned to a trip or short call before 10 a.m., they're also going to be entitled to those ad pays on top of the 2 hours for the block and the 15 minutes a day. Yeah. So if a pilot is given a trip from a short call or field standby, they're only entitled to the 1 hour pay because the first obligation was the start of the short call or field standby. The pilot on a trip on a VDO day is not entitled to those ad pays. Okay, and those are all stackable. So the stuff that we talked about, these, you can see how one trip can add up pretty quick. Voluntary field standby ad pay. It's 3 hours of ad pay for a pilot that picks up the field standby. And it doesn't change if you're used or unused for that field standby. Late build short call pay, another big complaint, and rightfully so from our pilots on reserve, that the crew desk doesn't build the short calls in the assignment window for whatever reason. Things roll on, and then at 10:30 at night, your phone rings and they need you on short call tomorrow. There's a penalty enacted here. A short call that's built after 1400, you get 1 hour of ad pay for that. Okay, contingent reserve assignment. This is the flip side to field standby. We talked about this earlier, that our pilots have indicated they don't have a problem suiting up and going to the airport for work. We're not about hanging out in the crew room and just having a leash jerked every once in a while because they can. So this doesn't change the fact that there are situations where close in to departure, something develops operationally where the crew desk needs to cover a trip. For example, especially our close-in flights, San Antonio or Austin to Houston, it's about a 1 hour block time. By the time they realize at pushback that they have a mechanical issue or something like that, they are inside of the 2.5 hour call out window, and their next flight when they connect into Houston is in jeopardy. The idea behind this that the company brought up about getting rid of field standbys, how do we protect that flying? And we said, well, you call the short call out. The next problem that came up was, are you going to hold us to removing the pilot should he come inbound and make that connection now? So initially push back out of Austin, you have an issue, they tow you back in, it's a cannon plug, you blow it off, it goes back in, and you're good to go. That short call pilot in Houston is headed to the airport to cover your Boston leg that's due to depart in an hour or so, but you're going to make it now. Under the current contract, a pilot who's called to the airport and given an assignment, a short call pilot who's given the assignment, your Boston leg, there's no provision in the current contract to remove that reserve involuntarily and give you your flying back. The downside to that is now you're available to the crew desk. You're inbound, you're going to make that connection. You want to go back onto the trip that you bid. They've replaced you, and now they have 20 F2 reassignment limits, which we covered. No set time limit on how long they have to find you other flying. And that's that dreaded thing when you call the crew desk and say, hey, I've lost flying. What's your plan for me? And they say, hang on. That's never good. Then you hear the clicking and you know that something is coming, probably something very inefficient and probably something that disrupts your day off. The flip side, the positive thing for our pilots in this is we negotiate the ability to get back on your trip if you're going to make that connection time. But with that comes an obligation for a reserve to be able to come to the airport and be sent back home. So this reserve that's on the short call is given what we've termed a contingency reserve assignment, which means at the time of notification, we need you to go to the airport, 2.5 hour call out, need you ahead of the airport. You are covering this Houston-Boston flight. They have to tell you that it's a contingency reserve assignment. They have to give you the full assignment. And the idea by it being contingency means they can pull you back off of that if need be, but only if that pilot is going to make that connection now. So that is your assignment for all intents and purposes, unless one thing happens, that other inbound pilot now has a minimum connection time of 20 G9 and can make that flight. For that contingency reserve assignment, they're limited to doing that 2 times in a bid period. So if you have that happen twice and you're removed from that flying twice, you're no longer able to be sent to the airport for a contingency reserve. Any more call outs to the airport during that bid period for that reserve on short call, that is your flying, you cannot be removed. Now, if you want to voluntarily come off, if you're walking on the jet and you have that awkward conversation where the other pilot says, this is my trip, I want it, and you're indifferent and say, you can have it, I'll go back home, be with my family, that's permitted. But if you've gone to the expense to suit up, go to the airport and all that, and you want to fly the trip, that is your entitlement.
Are you getting 515 again?
Wow, look at you. Yes. Yes. Yeah, you'll be paid show no go pay, which is now 515.
And that's regardless whether or not you're a VEC or a VSC.
Correct. Yeah, reserve call out pay. If you're called to the field and don't fly, then you're entitled to that. Okay, I think I covered everything on that slide. Oh, and if you come off of that trip, they have 1 hour to find you something else. You're not a field standby now, so it's not a hook to get you to the airport. And now that pilot is given their flying back, and now they're going to search for 4 hours to try and give you something. They have 1 hour to give you something else. Okay, we're doing good. We have 5. No, we'll have 5 more slides in this section. Okay. Okay, assignment allocation, reassignment limits. This is modified for 20L. So we added some simplification here, and it really is simplified. That's not code for concession, okay? But there were some time constraints in 20L where if you were double augmented and the reassignment occurred by a certain point, they could have you for 36 hours or 48 hours. It was very convoluted and very, very seldom used. So we went to the 48 hours for single and 60 hours for double on that. I want to double check something to give you information. There's one more thing that changed in 20L that is on the slide that I want to brief you on. Today in current book, the return time for your trip isn't set until closer in. for 20L reassignment limits and for ad pay. The gist of this is when you lose flying several weeks out or several days out, and they put you on AV, you're not entitled to the late pay of getting back if they do that more than 72 hours out from the beginning of that trip. We saw a lot of this during the pandemic. We see a lot of this for global flights when there's geopolitical issues or something like that, where we stop flying to a city and you lose all those. And I'll use an example like Delhi and Mumbai. Those trips get back at like 6 in the morning. If you lose that flying, I believe it's old book, so I'm trying to purge that. We'll say 72 hours or more in advance. You don't get reassignment ad pay for getting back after 6 a.m. on those because it happens so far out. We struck that language going forward. So those pilots are going to be entitled to that ad pay for getting back late for an AV assignment. Okay, so next up, GDOs. Company cannot reassign a pilot into a GDO. So instead of GDOs really being just a pre-assigned day off like they are today, they're golden only that you know in advance that you have that day scheduled off. But in the actual operation, for all intents and purposes, it's just like any other of your days off, meaning the company can reassign you into it. There's no restitution for that. You don't get to rebid it. It's just a pre-assigned day off. Going forward, GDO is going to be treated with the same treatment as a vacation day. So that is not going to be able to be disrupted for the assignment of a trip or reassignment on a trip. If the company is unable to return to your base prior to the start of GDOs, you'll be allowed to rebid them. So in the event that you're stuck out with a broken airplane or something of that nature, and now you're rolling through your GDOs, they're not just long gone. You're going to have the ability to go and rebid them at a later date. Unable to return prior to vacation. This is something that we obtained. And again, you can't be reassigned into vacation. But if you're babysitting a broken airplane in some far off place and there's no way for them to get you back in order to start your vacation, we see that more frequently on the 767 in Europe. And if you didn't allow a buffer and you're on that airplane and you're starting your vacation right afterwards, that's a concern. So what this allows is that you can get reimbursed for up to $1,500 if you have an expense that's not covered by trip insurance or something of that nature. You can at least get something back for your trouble if you incurred some expense from that.
So you have to show a receipt or something with some sort of booking?
Yes. Yeah. You have to show documentation. I think it's within 60 days that you have to do that. Okay, overtime ad pay, we've been talking about this all day. Finally, we get to the actual slides on this. This is a replacement for 20L6 A and B, late pay and day off pay. Currently today, your ad pay when you get back late to your base is based primarily on what you do for work on those days. So if you get back 18 hours late and all you did was fly the hour and 10-minute leg Boston and Newark, you're going to get at most an hour and 10 minutes of ad pay for your troubles. This is a shift in mindset to acknowledging that our pilots' time is valuable, whether we're at work, with our trip rigs, duty rigs, things like that, and then our time off. So we've done heavy lifting with our reserves and protecting time off and areas there. This is acknowledging that when you get back to your base late, and this is for any reason, this is operationally late. This is, Newark pilots are probably going to clean up here. But this is a really good thing because it means when you walk in the door and you finally get home, if you got home late, it doesn't matter what you were doing to get home late, you're going to be compensated for that. Look, our families don't care where we sit on the airplane when we get home late or what we did. They just know that we got home late. One of the most egregious things that we saw was in the islands, on the island hopper. The island hopper breaks down somewhat frequently, depending on who's flying it. And and when that airplane breaks down halfway on the flight home and lays over, there's no longer a need for a double augmented crew to get that jet back to base. And what happens, 2 pilots fly it and 2 pilots deadhead it. And today, under current book, the 2 pilots that fly it are entitled to day off restoration. They're entitled to the ad pay and those things. The 2 pilots that deadheaded 8 feet behind them in first class are not entitled to day off restoration. And that's absurd. So we got that fixed under this agreement as well. So the big thing here is the rate that this occurs. So the first 2 hours is we got to change something from free, but the first 2 hours is not compensated. So if you get back to base 2 hours or less late, you're not going to see any ad pay there. Everything after 2 hours late, all the way up until 23:59 on your last day of work, is paid on a 1-for-3 rig. So if you want to do the math in your head real quick, if it's 1800 that you're supposed to get back late and you get back at midnight, that's 6 hours late. Take 2 hours off, that's 4 hours left. 4 divided by 3 is 1 hour and 20 minutes of ad pay for that. Okay. The next rig, that's for the work day, just getting back late on a work day. Getting back late on a day off changes over to a 1-for-2 rig. So that same pilot that got back, let's change it from getting back at midnight. Let's change it to noon the following day. So the first 2 hours are not compensated. The next 4 hours, 1 hour and 20 minutes there. And then a 1-for-2 at 12 is 6 hours of ad pay there, plus 1 hour and 20 is 7 hours and 20 minutes of ad pay. And that's whether you flew a 1 hour leg, whether you deadheaded, whether you had a couple hours of flying, that's the ad pay that you're entitled to. Ad pay collects until you're actually released. So this is not scheduled. Today, our ad pay under 20L6 A and B is for scheduled flight time. So if you are scheduled for a 7-hour flight back from Europe or 8-hour flight back from Europe, and you're overblocked because the headwinds are ridiculous, you're going to get ad pay based on the scheduled block time of that flight, whatever you're doing later on your day off. Going forward, it's actual time late that you arrive back to your base. Okay, any time that overlaps a trip or training assignment will be removed from the calculation. So if you had work, they're not going to pay you time getting back home late if you were going to be working. This is the description there on this one. So the example is the pilot was originally scheduled to release on Sunday night at 2200. The overtime pay starts at midnight on the 1st. It goes for a 1-to-2 rig because those are on your days off. You're going to continue to have that overtime pay until 6 a.m. on Wednesday, because on Wednesday you were scheduled for training. So this is an example of a pilot that's stuck. I don't think we say where, but stuck overseas, volcano erupts in Iceland, something of that nature. You're stuck out. You're not going to get overtime ad pay there while you would be in training from 6 a.m. on Wednesday until 12 noon on Thursday. But the overtime clock restarts at the 1-for-2 rig because you would still be on a day off there, and continues until Saturday when you get back. This isn't the most absurd one. We did one for a Guam-based pilot that left to do a Narita turn, a 1-day trip. And that pilot got, like, current book they didn't. In a New World, do you remember what Tracy would have gotten? Like 68 hours ad pay?
In the New World,
Yeah,
it was like 60 or 70 hours of ad pay.
yeah. And like 4 or 5 days off restored. So granted, these are fringe cases,
Natural disaster.
but just so you're aware, that pilot, had they in the current book, what did they get? 4.5 hours of ad pay.
Yeah, just for the leg back, 100% for the leg back.
Yeah.
And restoration.
Yeah, and restoration.
Would you lose LPV and take another hit this year?
Right. Okay, line holder day off restoration for narrow bodies in the 756. 756 pilots are aware of this. You have to wait each bid period to find out which bucket you fall into. If your category averages 18 days off a month or more, then you don't get day off restoration. Doesn't mean you got 18 days off awarded in PBS, but the average in the category was that, so you don't get day off restoration in current. But going forward, 756 pilots are treated the same as Airbus and 737 pilots. All days off are eligible for restoration for 756. Okay, day off restoration for the wide body fleets. Today, the first lost day off on a trip that extends into days off is not eligible for restoration. So if you leave New York on a 3-day London trip and you get back on day 4, you lost 1 day off, you're not eligible for restoration. If you get back on day 5, something happened, get back 48 hours late, now you get 1 day off restored. If that same misfortune happens next week, lose 1 day off, you don't get it back. Lose 2 days off, you get it back. So it really chisels into your days off if this were to happen to you multiple times in the month. That's a frustration that we've heard from those pilots. Back in the day, the thought process with this was that our global pilots start the months with more days off because the trips were very productive. Back when we merged the airline, there were multiple 30-hour 4-day trips. There were several 30-hour 3-day trips on those fleets because of the loss of Asian flying in a number of markets and the additional basic flying that's been brought onto those fleets. Fleets are less productive, and the days of 21, 22 days off a month for the majority of those pilots have gone by the wayside. So what we've gone to capture here is day off restoration for those pilots. It is not the same as the basic pilots, but how this works is you're entitled to day off restoration for your day off that is lost, for your first day off that is lost now. The one caveat to this is that if you, there's an example here, so I guess we could go with that. So a pilot is reassigned on the first trip of a bid period into 1 day off. To restore the day off, the company drops a 4-day trip. So you call them up, say, I want the 16th off. That drops that 4-day trip. You get 1 day off restored. You have a 3-day AV obligation. If the pilot's unused on those 3 AV days, those are now 3 additional days off because unused AV days revert to no obligation. Those are 3 days off for minimum day off calculation purposes. You can choose to double dip over those days. You can choose to sit at home. You can choose to pick up flying on other days, and those don't count against you for MDO calculation. So if the pilot, so now you have a net gain of 3 additional days off at that point. If the pilot's unused on those. If the pilot's reassigned on a subsequent trip in the bid period to return to their base 2 days late, no additional restoration is required since the reassignment that the pilot, as a result of that reassignment, the pilot still has a net additional days off than what they started in the bid period. So again, foot in the door, we weren't able to do the heavy lift of additional days off for all these pilots. And really it's twofold. It's not just the day off, it's the dropping of that trip, especially if you're calling and you only have 3-day trips on a global fleet. And in your base, they only have 3-day trips. That's 3 days off is essentially what that's turned into. So that's what we were able to accomplish there. It's not perfect, but it was an improvement. And I told you we're not here at shopping from a menu, but what we talked about global, our peers at Delta have no entitlement to day off restoration. So this is something that not only were we able to keep day off restoration, company hates it. They would much rather pay you out of the till than have the obligation for day off restoration. But that's what we were able to obtain there. Yes, with company concurrence. Yep. Yeah, so they have to agree to it. Yep. And they manage that based on their staffing needs. Also based on the restoration that you're asking for. If you're asking in July, you've got a much better shot at getting day off ad pay in lieu. You also have, Sean mentioned it, if you restore a day off and your LPV is greater than your PTC today, you run the risk of seeing a decrease in your realized earnings, because when you restore that day off, the trip that's removed from your schedule, the LPV disappears from that, and now you'll be paid based on PTC and ad pay. What we've been able to negotiate is that current book, you can defer the restoration to the next bid period, but only if your PBS schedule is loaded. So if you are looking to defer the next bid period and it's before today, the 18th, going forward the 13th or 15th, depending on your seat, you don't have to wait for your PBS award to be loaded. So if you want to defer that restoration to the next bid period to protect your LPV, we were able to obtain that. Okay, new deadhead segments eligible for day off restoration. This, like if there's one thing that would make me emotional, this is one of them. This is what I talked about, if you deadhead only in a duty period, that today it's not considered reassignment. If you were to search the PDRs that the crew desk answers, I bet the top 2 issues are this. Pilots who have been well, we say reassigned, but by technicality, it's not. The pilot who misconnected or timed out or whatever, and all they have left the next day on their day off is a deadhead back to base. By definition today, that's not a new flying flight segment. It's deadhead only, and therefore it's not a reassignment by definition. The company gladly pays you for that, but you're not entitled to day off restoration. So last time I'll say it, our families don't care whether we sit in the back or we sit up front. They just know that we got home late, and this establishes that that day off had value, regardless of what the company chose to do with us. And we're finally able to obtain this. So by definition, if you're scheduled a deadhead on your day off, that is a reassignment. You get the ad pay as appropriate, but you also get day off restoration.
You choose the money, not the day off. Is it 5:15?
We worked so hard on this. Why would you do that? I'm just kidding.
No, yes.
Yeah, yeah. If they concur day off restoration, if they concur the ad pay in lieu of, yes, you can do that. Yes.
Someone's gonna ask.
Yeah. It's okay. It's okay. Well, I mean, look, again, there's 16,000 of us. So 1 month you may be after one thing, 1 month you may be after the other. So we leave that flexibility to the pilot, however we can. Okay, abnormal operations, 20O. This covers some break glass provisions that the company uses today, just some modifications. So reserve is staffed at a base that's affected by the SWAT plan. With company concurrence, a reserve can aggressively pick up open assignments at other bases after 1300. The idea here is if you commute to Newark and Newark is, for all intents and purposes, shut down, you couldn't get there if you tried, rather than getting, when they call you for an assignment and you say, I can't get there, and they give you a missed trip, you lose the value of pay for the day. You may say, hey, I'm in Boston, it hasn't hit here yet. I can get to Dulles or Cleveland or Chicago. It's after 1300. As a reserve, you have the ability to pick up a trip in that other base and preserve your pay. That's the idea behind that. You can also accept an assignment that disrupts a VDO at another base, as long as there are no reserves in that base that could get it by disrupting a VDO. So that other base, if they're offering VDO and there's an in-base pilot who has a VDO, they lay claim to that first because they're in-base. But if not, if you're in Boston or wherever you live and you can't get to your base and you're on a VDO, you can say, hey, I'll fly out of there, I'll take that. Again, gives you the ability to still earn some money because your base is shut down. But in-base pilots always have priority, much like everything else we do. The company must publish a message to all pilots, the base's start time and end times for abnormal ops. So they can't, this is not a switch, again, that a crew scheduler can turn on and off. This is something that's going to have some eyes on it and accountability, and the pilot has to be kept apprised of what's going on there. So everyone's in the loop. Okay, out of base trip pickup. Another thing that's that we hear about and we were finally able to achieve. A pilot can pick up out of base flying from a pilot advertising the trip to drop if there's no available trips in the other base. So the example here is Tim's in New York. Tim has a trip. He wants to get rid of it. He's tried to drop it. It's advertised out there. Anybody take it? I'm based in Houston. I can pick up Tim's trip going forward. Today, I can't do that. And it's really stupid because if Tim's not going to fly his trip tomorrow and I'm willing to fly it, Tim's trip is going to end up in open time somehow, and then I'll pick it up that way. So that's how we were able to get this. Okay. Now the idea here, there is a limitation. There is a limitation on it. That's if there's no available trips in Tim's base that I could fly there in open time. That was they agree with the company that they said, look, if we're sitting on a bunch of open time up here and you're willing to come up to New York and fly trips, we want to cover the open time first before you fly their trip. Available doesn't mean any old trip. You have to be legal for it as well. So it has to be legal. It has to fit on your schedule, things like that. Okay. Might not be commutable. So
if you want to pick up Tim's 4-day trip versus an open 1-day trip, that's what you want because there's open time.
yeah,
Outside of the trip.
correct. Again, foot in the door. If this is we're gonna watch this, okay? We know what's gonna happen to your trip. So, yes, sir. No, unfortunately, out of base pickup, current day, and it would be great if we could get it automated because it is a pain in the rear. You have to do it manually, and it's because of our technology. The system, if you do out of base flying, the system, you have to be manually changed to that other base. And when they manually change you, that essentially changes you for those 4 days for legality purposes and everything that's monitored in there. So it takes a human to do that. And until we can automate that, there's a desire to do that. But currently today, we're not able to. Yes, it's first come, first serve. Yep. Which probably benefits you if you're trying to get rid of your trip. You don't care who flies it. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. There's another option here, out of base trading. This is another thing that's come up. If you want to trade trips with another pilot. So I want to fly Tim's trip. I can't ever get down the Caribbean out of Houston, and Tim really wants to go to Managua. So we work it out and I say, hey, I'll fly your trip, you fly mine. Has to be done after 1300 local base time prior to the earliest trip. We have to have the qualifications to fly the trips. So if Tim has an Eagle trip and I'm not qualified to go to Eagle, this isn't a way for me to get Tim's trip, then get it dropped with pay because I'm lost qual. They saw through that. Okay, so you have to be qualified. If it's an FRMS trip, imagine this would probably be pretty popular for our global fleets. If all you're stuck doing in Houston is deep South America, and you can somehow talk somebody in Newark to go into deep South America in exchange for Dubrovnik or Mallorca, good on you, but you have to be qualified to do that trip. If it's an FRMS trip, the conditions and limitations in the FRMS cannot prevent an out of base pickup for that trip. So again, you can't trade into something that's going to result in you not being qualified for the trip and the company have to eat it. The last point here, you're limited to one out of base trip trade per bid period. The desire here, and this is driven by the MEC and probably rightfully so, it's to prevent abuse from pilots just swapping schedules every month. So I can't hold the desirable base with the nice flying. So I pay a kicker to that pilot and they give me their schedule and they fly my crap. And that's how it works. Not that that would ever happen, but this prevents it if it does. So one trip a month, you've got that ability.
Are you responsible for getting there?
Yeah, unless the other pilot buys your ticket. Yeah. And disclaimer, you should not do that. Or you should not, you should not put that out there. Okay. That happens a lot, especially with our peers that work on the other side of the flight deck door. And that's a big, the lawyers get super nervous about that. So just FYI, it's not how we do things here. Seniority. Okay, seniority trip trade system run, it's modified. We talked about this. We're moving PBS up. We should also move trip trading up. So the first trip trading run, the first opportunity to modify your next month's schedule will occur on the 21st at 1500. Today it's on the 24th at 1500. So everything in the month just slides up 4 days, 3 days. Okay, landings class scheduled around vacation. It's a modification of pilot. You will not be assigned a landings class on the days off before or after a vacation as awarded by PBS. This is something pilots are really good at this. Then today, a pilot could split their vacation up, for example, into multiple blocks throughout the month, and now they have multiple days off before and after multiple days of vacation, and now they're not available to attend a landings class. So the gig is up, and it's PBS awarded vacation there. So you're certainly allowed to move your vacation days around, but the designated days off before and after vacation are that original vacation block. If you choose to split it up, you're going to lose the protection where you split it up. Pilots who's been unavailable for 30 days or more immediately preceding the vacation, the company may drop the first trip after a vacation without pay if pilot declines a landings class on the days off adjacent to vacation. This is very much a fringe case, and frankly was negotiated before I joined the committee, but I would bet that there are people's names attached to this provision. So yeah, maybe. No, he'd probably show up for whatever they asked him to do. Okay, OE extended. So if a pilot's OE is not completed within 7 days, we talked about the OE extension hell where a pilot loses essentially control over their schedule earlier. We negotiated this and hopefully we never have to go back to these days, but during the pandemic, it revealed a lot of shortcomings in our contract that we worked to plug here. If you're not completed with OE within 7 days at the end of your OE blocker days, you can now designate a block of days off up to 4 days off in length that cannot be scheduled for OE. So it allows you to kind of regain some control over your schedule. There's still the flexibility because the company is paying you a number of days or greater for what you're going to fly for IOE. So they are on the hook for paying you pretty well during this time, but acknowledges that you're not on reserve for 30 days waiting on that phone to ring. You get some control back over your life. If you've not completed OE and now you're extended into another bid period, you can again designate another block of 4 days off in that bid period as well. So it's not limited to one 4-day block. It's one 4-day block per bid period once you're past 7. Hopefully it's not going into bid period 2, but there are definite cases where it could just slip into that and you could designate that. If you complete IOE prior to the designated block of days off, that designation is removed. Consolidation lines. We talked about the freezing of trips for consolidation, how they have a 10-day window to freeze those trips. If it's a flying seat, captain or first officer flying seat has to run through a trip trade run to allow pilots to have access to that trip, especially a pilot who's looking to trade from an IRO trip to a flying seat to get a landing. This is the balance of that. This is a consolidation line. This is for a pilot who can, this is a line holder who elects to donate their entire line for the purpose of consolidating a pilot. It's for new hires and first-time captains who have not consolidated. That's who can receive this. So this is not available for a non-new hire 777 FO, for example, but it is to any first-time captain. It's in, these are awarded in seniority order to line holders whose awarded lines satisfy the suitability criteria. We'll get into that here. What's not considered suitable, it's not destination based really. They're looking for trips that have flying seats attached, not an IRO seat. They're looking for quality of consolidation for those pilots. Deadheads on global flights, the thought process there is if it's a deadhead to Singapore and one leg back, that 4 or 5 day trip is going to net that pilot 16 divided by 2, 8 hours towards their consolidation requirement for 4 days. It's not worth the squeeze there, according to the company. And trips that include operation to restricted airports, local block time, less than 67 hours. So like restricted airports, Denver La Hui is an example. If they are sending a new hire on the 7.5 to La Hui, or we'll use San Fran, that's better, San Fran La Hui. La Hui is a restricted airport. The new hire, if they're on low time, they're not allowed to do the landing there. And on the flight back, they're not allowed to do the landing into San Fran, depending on the pilot's qualifications. So now you've sent them on this trip that they're not doing what they're supposed to be able to accomplish on that trip. Okay. Okay, 67 hours. If the line's worth less than 67 hours, again, that's not moving the ball down the field for their purposes, their intended purposes, or if the line holder has not yet completed consolidation themselves. So they're not gonna shoot themselves in the foot here. Okay, I think they navigated this pretty decently. Okay, so the donating pilot, in exchange, you dump your line. You're then allowed to build your own reserve schedule, and you can elect to do a traditional reserve, a long call, or if offered in the category of VEC or VSC or compressed line. So your line goes away, now you're reserved, but you build your schedule, and if whatever reserve type is built in that category, that's what you can have. If you donate your line, you'll be paid the PTC of your awarded line, plus the pilot will be paid 150% of the value of any trips flown on reserve as ad pay. The pilot's paid 1 hour of ad pay for any unused short call assignments. And pilot donates their line for consolidation. You're not able to get an unpaid drop for loss of currency for 60 days that follow. The idea there is because you voluntarily did this, that you need to fly when you have other trips. So the idea of giving all the landings to the FO, for example, after you do this would not work in this situation. The company, they can assign the consolidation lines based on the time remaining to consolidate and the days of availability in the consolidation window to the recipient there. These are voluntary. So if you're a commuter and this doesn't work for you, you should not bid this. It's completely voluntary. You don't have to do that. Say voluntary, no more. Okay, paid line holder landing class. Oh, one provision that we didn't cover in the consolidation freezing of trips. If the company is not offering consolidation lines in that bid period during that month, they can't get off on the cheap by just saying, we're just going to freeze 4 trips and assign you a consolidation line just made up of 4 trips that we've frozen from open time. You're limited to 1 trip per bid period if they go about that way. So try to build belt and suspenders here that they're not able to avoid this somewhat lucrative option in order to freeze trips from open time that we talked about earlier. Okay, paid line holder landing class. This improvement, landing class ad pay is increased to 4 hours and 15 minutes for 2023 and 5 hours of ad pay for 2024 and beyond. It's currently 3 hours and 45 minutes today. And we can't ask questions. Yes. Yes. All gone. Oh my God. Okay. Just a few more. We're almost there. Okay, LCPs. For all the LCPs that come up to me in the bathroom and ask me about questions, here's your answer. Because, well, they don't want to ask it in here because, hey, how much money, so here's your answers, okay? Okay, so 20S6, locking of LCP trips. So we have some new terms here. In the past, we've used terms interchangeably, locked, frozen, things like that. We're going to try and use these terms so that everyone understands what we're talking about. So an LCP can have trips locked. Those are the trips on the LCP's line. Locked means you can't trade out of those. They're locked on your line. A trip that's in open time, that would be for the student, presumably trainee, can't say student. Trainee is, I'll learn that one day. Pilot and, okay, anyways. The position that is going to be trained, the trip that's in open time, is frozen. So that trip is frozen, meaning it can be thawed. It can be placed back into open time if nothing materializes there, okay? Okay, so subject to fair and equitable distribution of LCP opportunities among LCPs in the fleet. Back in the old days, it was wild, wild west. The IOE schedulers had their favorites. The LCPs had their favorites. I assume the training schedulers ate well and had plenty of school supplies for the kids, and the LCPs got what they needed. That has largely changed for a couple reasons. One, training scheduling moved to Denver. A number of the training schedulers did not move to Denver with them. So that was the first thing that changed. Next thing that changed, the number of LCPs out there is tripled at least. So they're not on the first name basis with the LCPs anymore, nor should they be. And then lastly, we have contractual language that drives us going forward that allows uniform use of LCPs going forward. So how this works first, each LCP may have up to 60% of their awarded flying days of work immediately locked in their schedule at time of PBS awards are made. So these are work days, it's not 60% of their awarded hours. So if you're awarded, let's say you're awarded 10 days of flying, we'll make it really easy. 10 days of flying, they can lock up to 6 days of your flying. They can't lock partial trips. So if you have 2 4-days and a 2-day, and that's what you're awarded, they can lock a 4-day and a 2-day. They can't lock 2 4-days. That's the initial run. They can lock up to 60% of your awarded work days that are part of trips. In the initial run, they're locked. You can't trade out of them. Couple rules with the locking. They have to designate which trips are locked in accordance with this provision. So you need to know that they're locked. So you're not continually wasting trip trading effort on getting rid of them. The next one is they cannot lock additional trips until they're within 7 days of departure. For the trips that are not locked immediately, you can select one trip on which no LCP duties shall be assigned. So that is your trip that you know is yours to do with it as you please. If you want to trade that away, if you want to just enjoy flying and not having to teach that leg or that trip, you can do that as well. The company cannot lock a trip that touches a holiday that's as defined in the UPA. The idea there is if you were awarded a trip over a holiday that you don't want to fly, you want the ability to trade out of it or drop it, they can't lock that and prevent you from the ability to drop it or trade out of it. If you want that trip, you want the holiday pay that's attached to that trip, and you call them up and say, lock this trip, you can do that if you so choose, but the default will be that that trip is not locked. We don't know what code they're going to use yet, Tim. Don't know yet, but it'll be made aware to everyone that the trip is locked. Yep. Okay, mutual concurrence, the LCP can have a trip unlocked along with the LCP override removed. So we probably buried the headline here, but in exchange for having those trips locked, when they lock that trip and you're unable to trade out of that trip, along with that trip being locked, what you do get is you get your LCP override for every hour of that trip. whether they end up using you for LCP duties on that trip or not. So that's the incentive or the exchange in order for them locking up that trip. They're going to lock you up and own that trip and own your right seat or left seat as appropriate. They're going to compensate you whether you end up doing OE on that trip or not. If you call them and say, I would like that unlocked, with that unlocking and ability to trade that trip away goes the LCP override. If you unlock it and you end up staying on the trip and they end up giving you a student, you get the LCP override. You're not going to be uncompensated for doing LCP work, in other words. So yeah, that's buried down in there. Disagreements between locked trips between the LCP and training scheduling be resolved with the line training manager. So this avoids the conflict of the person on the phone who's, just doing their job. If you have something going on, if you have a concern, you can voice that up to your department head or whoever you report to in the organization for that. So we cover this. LCP awarded 15 days of flying duty, 3 4-day trips, and a single 3-day trip. 60%. There's a breakdown on what they could use based on those splits for 60 days, but for 60 hours. But they can't assign the 9th work day there. Okay, LCP meals and lodging. When you're conducting LCP duties from the jump seat, we just codified this that you're entitled to crew meals and lodging provisions as if they were operating the flight. Standards meetings. This is largely codifying what's in current practice today, but codifies it in the book going forward. That required standing meetings will be scheduled and paid as company business and preloaded into PBS. And then the minimum off-duty time between training events does not apply to the standards meetings. What that's really saying is you don't get the 18 hours off before or after training or before the training event and or travel to the training event. So it's current practice today. It just codifies that. This is something that wasn't thought of or occurring when the initial UPA was negotiated. We evolved, now we need to get it into the book. Okay, voluntary full-time LCP month. This is an option for an LCP. This is a new program. It's awarded in seniority order among volunteers. No individual LCP can be awarded this more than 2 bid periods in a row unless insufficient qualified LCPs in the fleet have not bid for one. So again, this is meant to spread it around a little bit so it's not the same people feeding at the trough, so to speak, and others are starving. So the schedule here, the LCP, you can preference 13 days off to be awarded. Once you get those 13 days off awarded, you can specify a block of up to 6 days in length there that must be awarded. So you're going to get 13 total. You get to pick one block of 6. It's very similar to global reserve in that instance. So then you get your schedule. You can be assigned trips that have been FBO'd. You can perform line checks from the jump seat, or you can pick up trips from open time subject to the management rules in 20H3. So that's going to, after 12 hours, it's in there. I'm tired. Okay. If you're interested, it's in 20H3. Any days not assigned by 1500 the day prior, the block will become days off. So it's similar to AV. If they don't have something for you on that block of days by 1500, those are your days off now. You're not a reserve. So that means you can only be given LCP work. They can't call you in to do FTC project work or things like that. If they don't have something designated for you, those are your days off. Okay, so now what are you compensated? You get 90 hours of credit at the higher of either best held rate plus the evaluator override in 23 Lima 2. So best held for you. So you may be an LCP on the 737, but if you can hold the 777, you'll get the best held 90 hours at 777 rate at the evaluator override, or the blended rate of the aircraft you're qualified to evaluate on plus the LCP override. And that's 90 hours at the LCP override. Okay, ability to pick up trips on days off that do not conflict with the scheduled days. You may do that and you're paid above the 90 hours. But it does have to be on your days off. They want to preserve those other 17 days of work for LCP duties. Again, purely voluntary. If you're not interested, no need to do this. Okay, LCP relief, request for relief from LCP duties. If you're facing burnout or you just need to take a break, we have a contractual ability to do that. Today you can just designate the one trip. I know of several very senior LCPs that approach their and it's a couple years ago, but approached the standards manager or whatever their title is and said, I just need a break. Just give me a month of just flying the line without students. And their solution, management solution, was to remove them from LCP status. Really stupid, because we lost a lot of really good qualified LCPs in that instance. So we have a provision for those pilots going forward today, that you can request a relief from performing the duties for a set period of time. You make the request to training scheduling, and if the request is denied, the LCP can be referred to the MEC vice chair for resolution with the vice president of flight operations. So that's really a, yeah, well, I mean, look, the training scheduling is the first one. Hey, and they're just doing their job. They got a slate of IOE that has to get done this month. They say, that doesn't compute. Every LCP, I need them to do 3 of their 4 trips. They can't make that decision. That's fine. Kick it up to the people who can. And today, and we anticipate going forward, we have an excellent vice chairman, good working relationship with Mark Champion, who is the vice chair or vice president of flight operations. They can come to an agreement. And really, is it worth losing that LCP and having to retrain a new LCP to replace them? That's stupid. So don't anticipate issues there. LCP agrees to add additional or different segments. This codifies something that if you are at the end of the trip and it's voluntary, you don't have to do this. It's an intelligence test. If that student is just an hour short and they say, hey, we can have them fly to Austin and Deadhead back, you mind if we do that? You as the LCP can make that decision, but that's not considered a reassignment. So you can work it out with the student. If you're there, they're there, you're ready to knock it out and get it done, you may choose to do that. Or you may say, hey, I've got plans, I got something else going on. This is something that happens frequently, and the LCPs get put under the pressure to, come on, the student's right there, looks like a puppy, they just want to get done. You got plans, and now you're kind of guilted into doing something. So it really kind of takes the pressure off and says, look, you can do that, but you're going to be doing it for straight pay. And look, it may work out for you to do that, get the student done, or if you got other things going on, no harm, no foul.
What about overtime?
No. Nope.
With the student, you'll get reassignment pay, but overtime is not reassignment.
2017 says the LCP shall be eligible for overtime ad pay in accordance to section 20 L.
Hang on, Tim.
That's even the black line right in front of me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks. So this, not for the, so let's say you're supposed to get into Newark at 9 a.m. They say, hey, if you'll do that Boston turn, gets back at 13:30, knocks your student out, everybody's happy. You're not going to incur overtime pay until after 13:30, not the 9 a.m. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So don't do it.
But this was nice in the past because we get 20 to 6 a.m. whenever they tacked on, right?
Right. Yeah. Imagine a world where perhaps an LCP lobbied for new flying to pad their pocket. The student may need more time if we could just get these extra legs. But it couldn't happen here. Not at this airline. Yeah, it wouldn't be prudent. Okay, these are some cleanup items. Rapid report ad pay will be the default. We had a scheduler, Amy, she's not here anymore, but Amy was very industrious, and she would track and see if you accept a less than 2.5 hour call out. She would wait and see if you actually pushed on time, and she would go back in the computer and remove the pay. Yeah, it was awesome. And Amy doesn't work here anymore. So the big thing there is there's a number of reasons why you might not push on time, right? You get to the jet and they haven't loaded the passengers, you're missing ice, you're missing catering, whatever. So the default is you're going to get the ad pay. And if somebody wants to go in and look at surveillance tapes and see if you scanned into the parking lot 3 hours after you were called and that's why you're late, that's a different story. But the default, look, they're not going to take the time to do that. That's stupid. But that's the genesis of that. That's why we got it, that it's paid at the time, because the other problem was you had schedulers that would wait until they got around to it later to make sure you pushed on time. And guess what they forget to do? Post-it note falls off and they never get it. Then you send a PDR. One of the hardworking crew desk pilots has to go in after the fact and say, this pilot needs the ad pay. So let's just get it done right off the top. Update example of buffer application. The example in there was a San Juan turn. We updated it to a Hong Kong flight, a little bit more appropriate. I was able to loop in an example with a global flight there. So these are not changes, they're cleanups, most of these. Clarification on requirement for PBS awards to be FAR and contractually compliant. I think that's self-explanatory, but it's clarified. Inability to dispatch due to high minimums or pilot refusing to fly with another pilot. The big thing on this, every once in a while, there's a conflict in the flight deck. What do we do when those two pilots refuse to fly with each other? Who flies the trip? What do we do with the pilot that we pulled off? They shouldn't be punished. Should they be sent on their way to do something else productive? That sort of thing that's codified in there, that's going to be considered a 20F repair. Language simplification for lost flying that had ad pay, covered that. I'm looking to see if there's anything else that's removal of PPU from a trip. That's current practice. If you are trading for a PPU trip that starts on Tuesday and you have a trip that starts on Tuesday, you're not entitled to that PPU because all you're doing is just changing what's in open time. There's nothing is getting solved that way. So the PPU is tripped there. What is changed is PPU stays with a trip trade. So if I have a 100% PPU trip that starts tomorrow, at the time I picked it up, it looked good. I thought it would work out. And then I'm excited about what I'm making. And my wife says, hey, we have that event tomorrow. And now I've just done something really stupid. I can trade that trip away with somebody else and the PPU stays attached. Look, if the company is willing to pay me to fly the trip with PPU, they should be willing to pay Scott to fly the trip with PPU. So that's the idea with that. Add-on flying at PPU could be assigned as part of and within limits. That's covered. Clarification as well. The clarification for reserve that allows a line holder to take their trip. We just changed the timing on that from 15 hours prior to 20 hours prior. That matches because we're going up from a 13-hour call out for long call to an 18-hour call out. Landing/travel, current practice, we just codified that. And then we brought into the main body of the agreement that if you refuse to fly an airplane because you think it's unsafe, absolutely within your rights. We say that the company cannot deadhead you on that airplane. Okay, but it goes the other way too. You cannot deadhead on that airplane, cannot deviate on that airplane. That's going to get you in the grievance department. Okay, so that's all that is.